It looks like LSAC may have just taken another quiet step toward scoring the writing sample. Of course, there hasn't been any announcement, there's not been any press release, but if you look at your official LSAT score report on lsac.org, there is now a field labeled Writing Ability Score sitting right next to your LSAT score itself. This is an actual field on an official LSAC document. Now, let me say this clearly right away. This does not mean the writing sample is being scored today. It's not being scored if you're taking the LSAT in January, February, April, or June. Nothing is changing overnight, but LSAC adding that field is not random. And when you zoom out and you look at what law schools are dealing with right now, this move actually makes a lot of sense. Now, this is not coming out of nowhere. LSAC wrote a blog post over a year ago saying that the writing sample would remain an unscored part of the LSAT, but over the course of the testing cycle, they are analyzing data of the new argumentative LSAT writing prompt to assess its validity and reliability with a long-term goal of providing a scored LSAT writing sample assessment. On LSAC's website, they also allude to it being scored in the future. They say that currently it is remaining unscored, but they do have the goal of course, scoring it at some point in the future. And admissions offices are pushing for this because they are facing a few problems all at the same time. Of course, application essays can now be heavily written or polished with ChatGPT. There is a lot of LSAT score inflation, and it's getting harder for law schools to tell who is genuinely ready versus who just optimized and is able to game the system. The timed writing sample is the only place where law schools can see how you think and how you write at the same time. Now, the writing ability score suggests that LSAC will provide both a scored portion of the LSAT out of 180, your traditional multiple choice portion, but separately a scored writing sample. Now, there's the question of whether scoring a writing sample is truly subjective, but there are objective ways to measure writing ability, and law schools can use metrics, they can use rubrics, they can look at the length of your essay, the depth of the vocabulary that you're using, the structured nature of your essays, and all of that can provide a quantifiable metric for a score in some way. Now, when LSAC changes the writing sample report, when they change your score report, it's not casually. They're doing it for a purpose. Fields exist because data is expected to show up there at some point. For a couple of years now, LSAC has been analyzing the new argumentative writing format for validity and reliability with the stated long-term goal of scoring it. And so we've got to look at what problem LSAC is trying to solve. Once you answer that, the rest will just fall into place. Now, you could ask, why not add yet another logical reasoning section, or why not tougher proctoring, or why not interviews? All of those would provide more logistical challenges, and some of them would not serve the same purpose, of course. Interviews are a whole additional logistical challenge. Some law schools offer them, some don't. Of course, that is quite labor intensive, but the writing sample already exists, and it's already part of the LSAT. It doesn't immediately mess with ABA reporting, and it's relatively cheap to scale. I could even imagine, ironically, law schools pushing LSAC to score the writing sample in response to AI-generated essays, and then LSAC using AI to score these human-written essays. Kind of ironic, but that's not a reason that law schools and LSAC wouldn't do it anyway. From LSAC's point of view, scoring the writing sample could be the lowest friction way to strengthen the validity of the LSAT without redesigning the exam from scratch. Now, LSAC will be the ones to ultimately decide whether and when the writing sample gets scored, but law schools will be the ones who decide how much it ultimately matters. Those are two different decisions. Even if the writing sample becomes scored, it won't suddenly become as important as your LSAT score out of 180 or your GPA. Any new metric at first is just additional context, not going to be a deal maker or a deal breaker. It's additional helpful context, but it's not going to be the ultimate decider. Now, a lot of people will say that law schools won't care. It'll exist, but nobody's going to use the writing sample. But that's not really how admissions works. Schools don't need to care loudly with big announcements for something to matter quietly on the sidelines. A scored writing sample would probably be used in a couple of different ways at the start. First, it could serve as a sort of check or a red flag check. So if your personal statement sounds off and your writing sample sounds totally different, they're definitely going to notice. If you have a really high LSAT score out of 180, but you can't write clearly under time pressure, they're going to notice. And it could also be used as a tiebreaker because when scores cluster, when there's a lot of score inflation, schools end up with a lot of applicants who look basically the same, similar GPAs, similar LSAT scores, comparable resumes. And so in those cases, you demonstrating your ability to write clearly under pressure could tip the scales in your favor. And then, of course, there's scholarships, because when an application looks really polished, maybe even too polished, schools are going to want an additional measure of confidence that you can actually perform independently without anybody else helping you. And you showing your ability to write well under pressure is going to help answer that question. Now, there's this natural worry that people have when they hear about a new metric, which is this just another thing I've got to max out? Is there a way to game this system? But this is very unlikely to become another arms race like the scored portions of the LSAT currently, because unlike LSAT multiple choice scores, writing assessments will not naturally spread people out cleanly from top to bottom from 180 to 120 along the spectrum. And that's going to limit how much weight the writing sample can realistically carry. We don't know that people's writing ability is distributed along a curve like LSAT scores will be. And schools are not trying to rank applicants from the best writer to the worst writer. They're asking a much simpler question, which is, does the writing make sense given the rest of the file? Meaning, does your application essay, your personal statement, does it match the quality of your writing sample, or is it suspect? Is it possible or likely that you are not the person who wrote your application essays? They're looking, in other words, for consistency. Then the other thing to know is that writing is hard to artificially optimize at scale, because you can't meaningfully game a live timed writing sample the same way that you can polish your essays over weeks using fancy admissions consultants or using AI. And you can't retake the LSAT, or the same way that you can't retake the LSAT multiple times. In other words, you can polish your essays, you can retake the LSAT several times, but the writing sample is going to be what it is, and law schools will be able to see it. And law schools don't really have any reason to turn this into a new cutoff, because they already have your LSAT score and your GPA for that. Those are the factors that drive rankings, they drive medians, and writing is not going to replace those. It sits underneath them as an additional check, but not a primary metric. So writing functions more like a stabilizer and a consistency check to flag mismatches rather than another metric that you have to perfect. And of course, if writing does become scored, which it probably will this year or next year, if I had to guess, I'd say more likely this year, starting in August or September. Because of the LSAT cheating scandals, law schools are pushing for a metric that cannot be gamed, the way the LSAT is getting kind of ruined in a way between score inflation and the cheating scandal with the cheating rings in mainland China. So the writing assessments will be messy at first, and law schools are going to know that, but it's more reason for this to get pushed going forward. Now, the writing sample will matter more if your essays were heavily edited or AI assisted, and your LSAT score, if it's a big outlier compared to your academic record, it's going to matter more. It's going to matter less if you're applying right now, or if your writing has been consistent, and if your LSAT and GPA already tell a pretty clear story. Now, one factor I wanted to talk about is the question of retakes and score validity, how those will be impacted by scoring the writing sample. So if the writing sample is scored in the near future, which I expect it will be, a lot of people are wondering, if this will affect your existing LSAT score, or if you could be forced to retake later. So I want to be clear. LSAC will not retroactively invalidate scores that were valid under the rules when you took the test. And so if you took the LSAT under a set of published terms, those terms still apply to your score. In other words, if you want to knock out the LSAT before they score the writing sample, you could take the LSAT now, lock in your score. It's good for 5 years. And then later, if they score the writing sample, you won't need to retake it. You're going to be set. In other words, if they score the writing sample, it will apply for future test takers, but not for those who took it in the past. So new test takers will likely have a scored writing requirement, possibly in the second half of this year, if not a year from now. And for a while, both versions will exist side by side, meaning some folks will be applying to law school with an unscored writing, some will apply with a scored writing during that transitional period. We saw LSAC do this in the past. Some folks applied to law school with Logic Games LSAT scores, and some after Logic Games were removed. Law schools don't really care which version of the test you took. It's all the same to them. They're not going to penalize you for it. Now, when people hear scored writing, they imagine law schools looking for something fancy, and they're not. They're not looking for beautiful prose or creativity. They're not looking for big words that are used just to sound impressive. What they want is much simpler and much more practical. They want to see that you can take a position, support it logically, acknowledge the other side, and communicate clearly under pressure. That is it. They're asking one basic question. If we put this person in a classroom, on a cold call, or on a timed exam, can they think clearly and explain themselves? So good writing in this context means your position is obvious, your reasoning is easy to follow, your paragraphs don't wander, and your writing is consistent from start to finish. Now, bad writing isn't about grammar mistakes or awkward sentences. Bad writing is when the reader can't tell what you're arguing, why you're arguing it, or whether you actually believe it. From a school's perspective, the writing sample is not about ranking applicants by literary skill. It's about giving schools the confidence that the person who shows up is the same person they admitted that you are the person who wrote your application essays. Now, to do well on the writing sample, whether scored or not, you don't need to become a great writer. You just got to look like someone who can think clearly and argue coherently under time pressure. If and when the writing becomes scored, it's going to reward clear reasoning, not fancy language. So stick to a simple structure, state your position, give a couple of reasons for it, acknowledge the other side, and then wrap it up with a concise conclusion. If you can't explain your position in one sentence, you probably don't really have a very clear position. So just pick one side, stick with it, and use the evidence deliberately. And writing under live conditions is actually to your advantage because you're going to have clear, simple prose with no need to edit heavily, no need to use AI. And if you can outline things cleanly in advance, it's going to make the writing a whole lot easier. Now, some thoughts on what not to do. Don't try to sound smart. Don't use fancy words that you don't know what they mean. Don't hedge, and don't ignore the counter arguments, and don't over-prepare for the writing at the expense of logical reasoning or reading count. Because even if and when writing becomes scored, logical reasoning and reading count still drive the outcomes and matter a lot more. And so, bottom line, even though we now have this writing ability score field on your score report, that doesn't mean that scoring starts tomorrow, but it does suggest LSAC is building towards scoring the writing sample, and it gives us more reason to think that they will start scoring it, even possibly in the second half of 2026. So start treating the writing sample like it could matter more soon. Use one repeatable structure and practice enough so that your writing ability under time pressure is fluent. Now, I see a lot of questions here in the chat. Thanks for dropping those in. I will get to as many of those as I can, so feel free to ask anything at all. LSAT and law school admissions, happy to help. I'll scroll back up here to the top and see what came in. I'll get to as many as I can. And by the way, folks, if you want to talk through your situation, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now and later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Happy to take any and all questions now and later. Question here, Cash is asking, the writing sample scoring is subjective and takes them a lot longer to score. Well, we have precedent for this, right? I mean, the SAT for a while had or has a score writing portion, so it's possible to do. I can't say that it's done well, but it can be done, and that might be enough for LSAC's purposes here. And so when we look at how they scored the writing on the SAT, they looked at the length of the essays, they looked at the paragraph breaks and the structure of the essays, they looked at the level of vocabulary being used, they looked at spelling and grammar, all of those being proxies for writing ability. Of course, those are fairly imperfect proxies. A longer essay is not automatically a better essay. An essay with more paragraphs is not necessarily better than one with fewer paragraphs, but all else being equal, on average, the graders of the essays make an assumption that length is correlated with writing ability and paragraph breaks are correlated and fewer spelling and grammar mistakes is correlated with better writing ability. So they're guessing that if you have more to say, that you're a better writer. If you have fewer mistakes, you're a better writer. And if you can use more advanced vocabulary, you're a better writer. None of that is necessarily true, but all else being equal, somebody who writes only 50 words probably is not as good a writer as somebody who writes 300 words or 500 words. So my advice to you would be to write more, all else being equal, to free write and then edit later. So spill out as much as you can, stream of consciousness in line with whatever brief outline you've laid out, and then edit it down after the fact. And of course, proofread well, use vocabulary words appropriately. Don't use them just to use them, but if a word comes to mind and it fits naturally, include it. Add multiple paragraphs. And so you could have an intro, 2 or 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion paragraph. Don't have 1 mega paragraph when you should have 3 or 5. Proofread after the fact. Proofreading is not the most important thing, but it is something that you can and should do, and hopefully you'll have the time. On the current argumentative writing sample, you have 15 minutes to plan and 35 minutes to write. So use that full time. Don't be lazy. Use the 15 minutes to look at the evidence, organize it into multiple paragraphs as part of an outline, then use the full 35 minutes that you have available to write to actually write. And use those to make sure that your writing is well structured with multiple paragraphs, that you add more details, more evidence, more supporting examples, topic sentences for each paragraph, conclusion sentences for each paragraph, and beef it up, spread it out, include more where appropriate. If there's another sentence that you can add that sentence. You don't want it to look too short because that'll stand out. Longer is better, all else being equal. Brittany's saying, typing slows me down on the writing portion. Well, you do get scratch paper, so use that scratch paper to plan. But when it comes time to write and type, then do it. And practice if you need to. I'm not saying you should practice a ton for now because it's currently unscored, but for those of you who are taking the LSAT in the second half of this year, meaning August, for example, and beyond, it might well be scored. And if you're watching this early and taking the LSAT a year or so, or a year and a half from now, it might well be scored in the summer of 2027. So prepare for the exam that you're ultimately going to take. Luciole says, I remember seeing you on LSAT forums back when I was looking at law school years ago. Now I've graduated and I'm a tax attorney. LOL. Awesome. Well, welcome back. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad to see that you're successful. You've finished out law school and all of that. And so it's awesome that you're circling back. Update me over email or text about how you're doing. That's great. Other questions coming in here. Matt is asking, should I be worried about a 3.5 engineering GPA if I got a 172 LSAT? Well, there's no point in worrying about things that you can't control. right? So your GPA is pretty much a done deal at this point, I'm guessing, if you're asking this question. And so we want to focus on what do you have the ability to improve at this stage, right? So if your GPA is fixed, that metric you cannot really change. Your LSAT score you can change. Your application essays, your letters of rec, resume, all of that you can improve. So focus on that. You might consider retaking the 172 if you think you could do better. You can also work on your application essays, personal statement, diversity statement, optional essays, addenda, work on all of those. And then we got to look at what schools are you considering, because everything is relative. For some schools, a 172 LSAT and a 3.5 GPA might be enough. For others, it might be a bit below medians. For others, it might be above. So it's all relative, right? And if you want to talk through your situation, help craft a school list, help craft a plan of attack, you can always book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me. Again, the link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to everybody watching this now or later. I'll be happy to help. Got a question from Braden asking, considering the rise in LSAT scores along with cheating samples, would LSAC ever move toward administering the writing sample during the exam on test day? I don't expect they would, because they have a fairly good process right now for that, where they administer it on a separate sitting, but you are still proctored remotely. It's recorded, it's not live, but they're watching you with a webcam and a microphone. They're checking the room background around where you're sitting. Hopefully they can lock down security for this a little bit better than they have for the LSAT so far, given the cheating that has occurred. But I don't know that it would improve security to administer it during the multiple choice portion of the exam relative to doing it separately. I think this is really more of a software arms race more than anything else. Just scanning through here for more questions. Clomil's asking, is the argumentative essay going to improve the actual multiple choice score? So given what we're seeing on the new official LSAT score reports, it's looking like the writing sample score will be a separate metric from the score out of 180. So you've got your LSAT score on the spectrum of 120 to 180 for the multiple choice portion. And then separately, you're going to have a writing sample score out of a given number, but that would be a separate delineated or itemized score, not related to your score out of 180. So two separate scores. You'll have your multiple choice LSAT score and you'll have your writing sample score. And LSAC will probably start scoring the writing sample either in the second half of this year or 1 year from summer 2026. So either I expect it'll happen July or August of 2026 or July or August of 2027. If they're going to start scoring it this year, they'll probably announce that sometime in the next couple of months, just to give folks a heads up and give them some ability to plan for that change. And again, the indications of them scoring it come from the new field on the score reports, as well as a blog post on their website from last year, and then text on their website that I mentioned and read from at the open of today's conversation. And so if you're just joining now and you go to the YouTube channel, link in my bio, by the way, you'll be able to watch this from the top and you'll see where I talked about that. Got a question here asking, if I plan to apply in 2 years but taking the LSAT now, will I have to take the writing when I apply? So everybody taking the LSAT is required to do the writing sample before they release your score. Everybody has to have some writing sample on file, whether you're taking the LSAT now, where the writing sample is currently unscored, or you take the LSAT in the future when the writing sample will be scored. Either way, you do have to have a writing sample on file, no matter what. The question is, are you going to take it now when it's currently unscored, or take it in the future when it is scored? And by the way, if you don't want to take the LSAT with a scored writing sample, if you want it to be unscored, then you probably want to take the LSAT before the change happens, and your LSAT score will be good for 5 years. So even if you don't plan to apply to law school for a couple of years, but you want to avoid the scored writing sample, just lock it in now. If you take the LSAT in February, April, or June, those could well be your last 3 opportunities to take an unscored writing sample. And no, they will not grade your writing retroactively if you took it today, but apply in a couple of years. So you could essentially be grandfathered in. Hope that answers your questions. Again, if you want to talk through this, feel free to book the free LSAT tutoring lesson with me, and we could talk through your situation in more depth. Happy to help. And by the way, folks, if you find these live conversations helpful, I do this every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. And by the way, please spread the word. I mean, I really appreciate it. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these lives, and the algorithm doesn't really boost them because they can run ads during them. So the only way is through your support, spreading the word. I really do appreciate it. Just scanning through the chat here for more questions. Feel free to keep them coming. I'm trying to prioritize questions where I can give a more substantive answer, and anything writing sample related, I'm trying to prioritize as well. Nikon's asking me to explain the different LSAT sections and how to prepare for them. So you've got currently 2 scored sections of logical reasoning, 1 scored section of reading comp, and 1 unscored extra section of either logical reasoning or reading comp. Then you separately have the unscored writing sample currently. And I would always recommend prioritizing the scored portions of the LSAT over the unscored portions. So don't spend a lot of time on the unscored writing if you're not scoring at or above your goal score on the scored portions of the LSAT, because the scored parts matter a lot more. Law schools consider your LSAT score, your GPA, and then a distant third would be all the other soft factors like your application essays, your resume, your letters of rec. If you interview, they consider your interview. The writing sample currently being unscored, they focus on it when they have questions over your English fluency, if you are a non-native English speaker. If your writing related or English related grades in college weren't very good, if they have questions about the legitimacy of your application essays, they want to compare your writing sample against those. But in the absence of those sorts of concerns, the writing sample really isn't that important currently. However, if the writing sample becomes scored, which I expect it will be, then they will give that more weight, of course. And if the writing sample score is reported to the ABA, which I expect it will be, and if US News factors in writing sample scores as well, then it will carry greater weight and it will become more important, possibly similar in importance to the current multiple choice portions of the LSAT. But the extent to which the writing sample score is going to matter will depend on how it's factored in the US News rankings. So there are still some open questions around that. Now, there is a lot more I could say about the logical reasoning and reading comp sections. I've spoken about those at length in the past, and I will again in the future. And so you can click over to the YouTube channel through the link in my bio to watch a lot more material on the different LSAT sections, different LSAT question types. One thing I'll say is that it's really important for you to establish a strong foundation in the scored portions of the LSAT, the fundamentals, the foundation, how to approach each section and each question type before getting into doing individual timed sections and full-length practice tests. And so if you want my help crafting a plan of attack, crafting a study plan for you whenever you're taking the LSAT, whether it's February, April, June, or beyond, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now or later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Again, that is an open offer to everybody watching this now or later. I'm happy to help. But I do recommend focusing on the LSAT, getting that score, locking it in, because the LSAT score is the most important factor in the law school admissions process. It weighs more heavily than your GPA or your application essays, and so it's worth giving it the time. Law is asking, is a -12 good for a first-time diagnostic test without having done any prior studying? Yeah, that's actually pretty awesome. A -12 to start with, that probably puts you in the roughly the mid 160s, depending on the test that you took. And that's a pretty solid starting diagnostic score. It was better than my cold diagnostic. I started off with a 152. I did end up with a 175, but it took me an entire year to get there, and at least half of that was a complete waste of time. If I had done it properly, I could have knocked it out in just a couple of months because the LSAT is ultimately a test of pattern recognition. If you can spot the tricks and traps, you can avoid them. It all comes down to understanding how the test makers think and seeing it from their perspective. And once you do that, everything changes. And to your question of how to get to a mid 170s LSAT from the high 160s, it comes down to getting those tougher level 4 and level 5 questions right. And those questions are differentiated by the level or the complexity of the tricks and traps contained within those questions. So, an easier question, a level 1 question, is going to have 0 traps or maybe 1 trap. A level 4 or level 5 question will have several traps contained within it. And so, your ability to disentangle and interpret the tricks and traps to remove the layers of complexity and get down to the core underlying method of reasoning or argument is what succeeding on this test is all about. And it comes down to the depth with which you review your mistakes. At LSAT Unplugged, we use a framework called the Socratic Review Method. It's a cornerstone of my courses and coaching programs. And the way it works is that we ask you a series of guiding questions to help you get down to the root cause of what you're getting wrong and why, so that you can avoid making those same mistakes again. For example, we look at, was your mistake in the passage text or the question stem? Was it in the answer choices? Was it a tempting wrong answer, or was it an unappealing right answer? Because if we can get down to the root cause, we can nip it in the bud, and you're not going to make the same mistake again. And you could document this in a mistake journal, a wrong answer journal, an error log of some kind. It could be a Google Doc, a Google Sheet, a physical notebook for all I care. Doesn't really matter. The idea, though, is that you've got to articulate your thought process, because when you're doing this on your own, in your head, it's too easy to look at the correct answer and say, oh, I get it now. How could I have been so dumb? But if you do that, you're probably not really getting down to the root cause, and then you may end up just making the same mistake all over again. And that's really what you want to avoid, because the point of taking these practice tests is not just to measure yourself, it's to learn from your mistakes. The LSAT repeats itself over and over and over. And if you're not learning from your mistakes, that same trick and trap, it's going to show up again. And it's going to show up again after that. And if you don't truly understand why you got something wrong, you'll probably just end up falling for the same trap again. And then what's the point of all this, right? There are approximately 60 full released practice tests available to you on LSAC's Law Hub Advantage platform. You get 4 of them for free with a free lsac.org account. You get the other several dozen for a subscription of $120 a year. Well worth the investment. Don't get physical books for this because the LSAT is now administered online. You want to practice like it's going to be on test day. And a lot of folks experience significant test day score drops of even 5 to 8 points because they're not fully familiar with or acclimated to the test day format. And so one way that we help students avoid those score drops on test day is by preparing them for the proper test day interface. And so you don't want to use some third-party platform or unofficial software or physical book and then not be ready for the test day format as a result. So well worth the investment getting Law Hub. Just scanning through here for other questions coming in. Got a question about the February LSAT here. Is the February LSAT too late? Well, first off, I mean, the January LSAT is not too late. So those of you taking the LSAT this week, you're totally fine. Pretty much every single law school in the US will accept the results of the January LSAT. Same goes for the February LSAT, by the way. The February LSAT also is not too late. The cycle has shifted later and later over time, such that February and January are both smack in the middle of the cycle. April's too late for most schools. June is also too late for most schools, but if you're taking the LSAT this week or in February, you're totally fine. And of course, you can reach out to any individual school to ask about this and just double check and confirm. And I hear this question every single year, especially in mid-January. It's like a low-level panic that builds up where people are asking, can I take it in February? Is February too late? Will I still be able to get scholarship money? And I want to emphasize for you that the February LSAT is not too late. It's not too late to get in, not too late to get significant scholarship money or even a full ride. And there's a lot of outdated information out there about this. People are afraid that it's past the deadline or there's no money available or the committee is going to say to them, if only you'd applied a couple weeks earlier, but it's not how it works. That's not the incentives of the schools to care when you applied because they're not evaluated based on that metric. That is not their incentive to care. They are not evaluated based on how early you apply. They only care about your numbers, your LSAT score, your GPA, and protecting their medians. That's what goes to the American Bar Association 509 reports and in turn, the US News rankings. And so imagine that you took the LSAT in February, you scored a 173, and you applied immediately when scores came back. A school that has a median LSAT of a 170, they're going to be thrilled with your 173, and they will be happy to throw scholarship money at you if you are above their median because you improve their stats. You are a gift to them, and they're not going to say, well, you took the LSAT too late, so even though everything else is great, numbers-wise, we're not going to take you. Not how it works. The mistake is rushing and taking the LSAT too early with a score that isn't as good applying with subpar numbers because those extra points make a massive difference. They make the difference between getting in versus getting rejected, getting waitlisted versus getting in, paying sticker price versus getting a full ride. I've worked with students who pushed their LSAT back a single month from January to February and improved their score by 10, 15 points or more. A single month changed their entire admissions outcomes. And of course, that is not a promise or a guarantee that you will experience similar. Your results may vary. I mention this simply to show you what is possible when you're willing to give yourself a bit more time. Now, 10, 15 years ago, January and February might have been borderline late. Schools had firmer deadlines. They didn't encourage February applicants, but things have changed. Deadlines have been pushed back because of all the uncertainty in recent years with the removal of the logic games, with the ban on affirmative action, the Supreme Court decision, with all the LSAT format changes. All the uncertainty led law schools to take more of a wait and see approach. They wanted to see who else would come along. And so as a result, law schools are taking that wait and see approach, waiting more for better applicants. And so you could take the February LSAT, get your score, submit immediately when scores come back approximately 3 weeks later, and schools will still have seats and scholarship money available to you. And if you're uncertain, if you're worried about this, you could just ask the schools. Reach out to them and say, will you take February LSAT results or is it too late? And almost all of them will respond saying, we will still consider February LSAT scores, we'll still review your application. It is not too late. I can't think of a single school in the US in the last 5 years that told an applicant, no, we will not look at your February LSAT score. And of course, at this point in your cycle, your GPA is fixed. You probably already got your letters of recommendation, your resume, your application essays, but the one thing still in your control is your LSAT score. It is the lever that still moves everything. And so if you think to yourself, Steve, I know if I had 4 more weeks, I could score 5 points higher, then waiting to take the LSAT is the obvious choice. It's better to apply a month later in February with a higher LSAT score than earlier in January with a lower LSAT score every single time. And if you push your LSAT back a month, you've got more time to study the LSAT, more time for logical reasoning in particular, and any gains you make in your understanding of logical reasoning will be doubled across the two sections. Even just a few more weeks could make a massive difference in giving you more time to take more practice tests, to review your mistakes in more depth, to drill your weak areas. All of that enormously valuable, and even a few points more on the LSAT could translate into tens of thousands of dollars in scholarship money, maybe even getting a full ride. This is the easiest money you will ever make. Law schools would much rather give money to somebody with a stronger LSAT score in February than somebody with a weaker LSAT score in January, again, because you help their medians, you help their rankings, you make them look good in those ABA 509 reports, which in turn go to US News for inclusion in the ever-important law school rankings. So to sum it up, the February LSAT's not too late for admissions or for scholarships. If you want to give yourself the best chance to get into the law school you want with as much scholarship money as possible, it's worth applying in February over January. And of course, if you would like my help preparing for the LSAT in February or beyond, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now or later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to everybody out there. Happy to help you and talk you through your situation. Stavros asking, my LSAT is tomorrow. What should I do today and tomorrow morning to prepare for the LSAT? Honestly, very little, maybe even nothing at all. Today should be a day to rest, relax, recuperate, take it easy, take a warm bath, get a massage, go for a walk, watch Suits, Netflix, Legally Blonde, whatever, just motivation really. You could lay out all your test-taking materials today so that when you're all ready for tomorrow. So you want your government-issued photo ID, you want your number 2 pencils, your scratch paper, your snack for the test, your water for the test. Do a system check on your computer. If you're taking it remotely, make sure all of that's squared away. Set multiple alarms the night before so that you're waking up bright and early, ready to take the test and crush it. But yeah, nothing new to learn, no material really. I would always recommend doing some warm-up questions before the test so that the first questions you're doing are not the ones that count. So a favorite reading passage, a couple of logical reasoning questions, just to warm up your brain a little bit, but nothing really beyond that. I mean, at this point, you should go in with a positive attitude, knowing that you're ready, trusting in what you've done up to this point. Bree's asking, what about April? Is it too late to apply? I took the LSAT yesterday. I'm still nervous. I've got a 4.0 GPA. So 4.0 GPA is awesome. I love it. Let's match that awesome GPA with an awesome LSAT score and just crush admissions. April is a little bit late for this cycle. Some schools will take the results of the April LSAT. And to Celia's question as well, what about April? So, I mean, you could, if you really, really want to start law school this fall, you could reach out to the schools that you're considering and ask them if they will take the results of the April LSAT. Some will, some won't. Never hurts to ask. But for the best admissions outcomes and getting maximal scholarship money, I consider February the cutoff, meaning February is okay, but nothing beyond February. If you're taking the LSAT beyond February, typically better to take it in April, have June as a backup test date, work on your applications over the summer, and then hit submit on everything the second that application's open in the fall. And by the way, your LSAT score is good for 5 years. So totally fine to take it earlier and then apply a little bit later. Neva Donato is asking, how many T14 admissions would you guess for a 172 LSAT and 393 GPA? I don't want to answer this numerically because it's kind of taking shots in the dark and just randomly guessing. I mean, a 393 GPA is at slightly above median on the GPA front, 172 is also kind of in the middle there. So I'd say you'll probably get into a couple, but rather than just speculating and guessing, I'd say just do it, just apply. Blanket the T14, apply to all of them, and apply to some outside the T14 as well, just to be safe. See what comes back. And if you really want to maximize your offers, retake the LSAT and get a higher number, get a higher LSAT score. I mean, I think you'll get into more T14s with a 175 or 176 than with the 172. Because 172 is kind of in the middle there medians wise, and schools are always looking to raise their medians. You also have way more applicants this cycle over last cycle. And so medians are a lagging indicator, meaning they only reflect the past. They don't reflect the future, right? So medians are telling you the typical profile of last year's incoming class. And law schools are always looking to increase their medians over the previous year. They want to maintain and they want to increase. And you have way more people applying this cycle. Applicant numbers are up 50% over the past 2 years. So for every 100 people applying 2 years ago, there are now 150 people applying. So the competition's rising. There's also a lot of LSAT score inflation, meaning LSAT scores are rising as well due to more people retaking the LSAT, due to more LSAT accommodations for people getting extra time. And so it might not be a bad idea to retake if you think you could do better. Not saying you have to, of course, but if you really care about getting into a T14 and want to have multiple offers, might not be a bad idea. But you could still apply and see what happens. I see Celia is saying, I want to get into a T14. Just to say I got into a T14, it's a pride thing. I mean, I totally hear you on that. Prestige matters, but also consider what you want to get out of this. It's not, I mean, you're paying a lot of money and you're spending 3 years of your life. To do it all just for bragging rights might be a bit much because you're going to be the one there suffering, doing the work. And you'll have the degree at the end to show for it, but also what do you want to do with your life, right? I mean, what kind of employment do you want to have? Do you want to work in big law? Do you want to be a Supreme Court clerk? If so, T14 might make sense. If not, if you want to open your own practice or if you want to work for a small to mid-sized firm, then maybe going to a lower ranked school with more scholarship money might be the path. And now Celia's saying she doesn't actually want to go. She just wants to say that she got in. Hey, I mean, that I like a lot. Okay, so you're going to take the LSAT, you're going to get into a T14, then you're going to reject the T14 and say, no, I didn't actually want to go there. I just wanted to take the spot. Okay, so I mean, what you could do is there is actually a case for applying to schools you don't want to attend. And that's this. Okay, so when it comes down to negotiating scholarships, you want to have multiple offers in hand, right? You don't want to only apply to one law school in total because then it's basically take it or leave it. But what you could do is apply to a mix of reach schools like T14s, target schools where your numbers are on point, as well as safety schools. Then with the acceptances from the safeties and the targets, you then go to other targets and maybe even some reaches and say, hey, I would love to go to your school, but these other schools offered me a full ride and significant scholarships. I would much prefer your school, but finances are real. What can you do to boost up the offer? Do it politely, but do it seriously. And you may be surprised by what comes back to you. Of course, schools are more likely to give you more money when you have a competing offer from a comparable school rather than a school that's radically different in ranking, for example, but never hurts to try. See what happens. But typically when you want to work in big law, going to a lower ranked regional school might not have the same recruiting opportunities as higher ranked schools. So when you're considering law schools, look at their employment outcomes, talk to admissions and ask about what kind of on-campus recruiting the target law firms do at your target school. If there is no recruiting and the Office of Career Services is not going to be that helpful, then maybe it's not the right school for you. So always look at what the end in mind is, what your goal is when you're considering schools. Thanks for the great questions, folks. Feel free to keep them coming and I'll get to as many as I can. Got a question asking, how far in advance do most people start studying for the LSAT? I mean, a lot of people try to knock this out in just a couple of months, but in reality, it typically takes 5 to 6 months of serious studying to reach your fullest potential on the LSAT. Not saying that everybody has to, of course, study that much to go for fullest potential. In some cases, you might not need that much time to reach your goal score, but for the best outcomes, more time is always going to be really helpful to get there, right? So give the LSAT the weight that it deserves, give it the time it deserves. The LSAT score weighs more heavily than your undergraduate GPA. It weighs more heavily than all of undergrad combined. And if you are an international applicant, then they won't be able to consider your undergraduate GPA. If you took the if you did your undergrad outside North America, they're not going to know how to interpret your transcript. And so they basically don't consider it, which takes all the weight they would have placed on the GPA and transfers that weight onto the LSAT score specifically. Not saying it's fair or that it's right, but it's just what law schools do. And so as a result, if you are an international applicant or if your GPA isn't what you would have liked it to be in undergrad, then all the more reason to shoot for the highest LSAT score possible and give it the time, give it the attention that it deserves. And again, if you want my help crafting that plan of attack to maximize your LSAT score whenever you're taking it, again, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link to book that call is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to everybody watching this now or later. Whether you're taking the LSAT in February, April, June, or beyond, happy to help. I saw JD, you're taking it in June. Going to use my site. Awesome. Feel free to reach out and book the call. Same goes for you, Stavro, or Santi, or Knock, or anyone, Celia, anyone else watching this. Open offer. I'm happy to help you out and help you figure out the best possible path for you to reach your goal score. And we do customize every single program for the individual student, considering your time frame, what you're currently scoring, and what your goal score is. And so for a student who's taking the LSAT in April, for example, you've got 3 months between now and then. So we design your study plan around getting you to your target score by April, spreading your practice tests over that 3-month time frame. If you're taking the LSAT in February and you only have 1 month, then we're going to compress and accelerate it more through a more intensive or boot camp style approach. So everyone's study plan is going to look different, but we always design them with building the foundation first, learning the different sections, the different question types, then transitioning into pacing and time management, doing individual sections to help you allocate your time over the course of the section, and finally pulling it all together with full-length practice tests, with the goal being that test day itself looks like just another run-through. We typically want you doing at least 10 to 15 full practice tests in strictly timed settings because we want you to be ready for the endurance factor of the LSAT. 2.5 hours of sitting for the LSAT's no joke, and it's even longer if you have extra time accommodations. A lot of folks will have time and a half or even double time on the LSAT, which makes for a much longer sitting. And so the dark side of having extra time is that while time management becomes less of an issue because you have more time to solve each question, you're sitting there for a much longer period of time, which could be quite taxing. So we don't want you to neglect the endurance factor as well. So we have this LASER approach that we use. LASER is an acronym standing for Learning, Accuracy, Sections, Exams, and Review. It's the cornerstone of my courses and my individual coaching programs. Learning is building the foundation in the different sections, the different question types. A is for accuracy, drilling questions by type to better understand the proper perspective from which to view each section and each question. S is for individual sections, working on pacing and time management, 35-minute timed sittings. E is for exams and endurance, doing full-length timed practice tests in those full sittings of roughly 2.5 hours. That's 2 sections back-to-back, a 10-minute break, then 2 more sections back-to-back, and that's the test. We have E for exams and endurance, doing those full sittings, and finally R for review, using that Socratic review method. So every study plan will involve all 5 phases of the LASER approach. Again, learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and review. We build out your plan with that LASER approach in mind. Of course, if you're taking the LSAT a year from now, it's a lot more spread out, maybe only 5, 10 hours a week. If you're taking it in only 1 month, it's a lot more compressed and accelerated. In our boot camps, we typically have you doing live coaching 7 days a week to maximize the score that you can achieve in a relatively short period of time. And that might involve more like, say, 20, 25 hours a week, depending on your schedule. If you're taking it roughly 3 to 6 months from now, that's kind of the sweet spot where it's a more slow and steady approach, but you're not spending a whole year on this. In that case, it's more like typically 10 to 15 hours per week to help you get to your goal on a reasonable time frame. But again, we consider whether you're in school, whether you're working, whether you have family obligations, everyone's schedule is going to be different. We typically like to build days off into your plan to mitigate the risk of burnout. But again, if you want to talk through your personal situation, given any other obligations you might have, I can help you craft the optimal plan of attack to help you get to your goal on your time frame. So again, feel free to book that free tutoring lesson with me personally. Again, the link is unpluggedprep.com/start. If you find these lives helpful, I do these every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. If you find this helpful, please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these lives, so I really do appreciate your spreading the word, whether it's through Discord, Reddit, Facebook groups, wherever you're hanging out with others studying for the LSAT. I do appreciate your sharing this link on your social media, for example. I do still see some more questions here. I'll get to as many as I can before wrapping up. I see that she is asking, do schools take extra time accommodations into consideration? So actually they don't, because they can't. Due to LSAC being sued under the Americans with Disabilities Act, there is no asterisk on your score report noting that you got extra time. And so law schools will not know whether you had extra time accommodations or not. All they see is the score out of 180. And so a student who got a 180 with standard timing looks the same as a student who got a 180 with extra time on their report. No difference at all. They will not know. So hopefully that mitigates any concerns you might have about the stigma of having extra time. Rachel's asking, if I'm a second semester junior in college, but need to get my GPA up, when should I take the LSAT? Take it whenever you're ready. Your score is good for 5 years. If you feel like you got to get your GPA up, I'd say focus on the GPA for now, focus on your classes for now. The LSAT is not going anywhere. You could delay it till later. One approach a lot of students take is they study for the LSAT over the summer when they're not taking classes, then they take it late in the summer or early fall. So you could focus on school for now, assuming that school ends for you in May or June. Focus on school till the semester ends. Then you study for the LSAT over the summer, and then you take the LSAT in August or September. That might be a pretty reasonable approach to shoot for. A lot of folks take that approach. I don't really see a whole lot of downside for that. You could also study for the LSAT over winter break, then take it in February next year. It's up to you. Depends on how soon you want to go to law school and how much you got to raise your GPA. I never want you to sacrifice your GPA for the LSAT, but also consider that law schools weigh your LSAT score more heavily than your undergraduate GPA. So it might make sense in some cases to take a lighter course load one semester so that you can simultaneously study for the LSAT. A lot of folks do that as well. Eden's asking, I haven't applied yet for this cycle. Am I too late? No, it's not a done deal yet. I mean, I would typically recommend applying no later than after the February LSAT. So you take the LSAT early February, scores come back this year, February 25th. So ideally you apply before the end of the month in February. Once you get into March and April, it's a little bit later in the cycle, harder to get in, less scholarship money available. So hopefully you can knock it out by February. Once we're looking at April or June, it becomes a bit too late for the best outcomes. And in that case, I would say push it back to next cycle instead. But situations vary. There can be exceptions, of course. Feel free to book the free tutoring lesson with me and we could talk through it more. I see a question from, let's see here, Anna asking, I want to go from a 141 to the mid 170s as a full-time student. How possible is that? I mean, everything's possible provided you're willing to put in the time and the work to get there, right? So a 30, 35 point increase is not easy, certainly, but we do see it happen. It's a function of the amount that you study and the way in which you study. So as a full-time student, you want to take a more slow and steady approach given the competing obligations. Would ideally want you to give this at least 3 to 6 months to reach your fullest potential so that you're not cramming, you're not burning out, you're maintaining your quality of life and maintaining your grades as a student in college. And if you want my support, again, you can feel free to book that free tutoring with me. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. Happy to meet with you personally and talk through your situation with you. That's it for now, folks. I'll see you all on Monday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.